On today's episode of Extreme Talk, I sit down and talk to Peter Coleman from the National Athletic Association of Private Schools to talk about their involvement and coverage of 8-man football teams across the United States. I also give my grades for all 12 MTAC schools, as each of them have played at least one game. I'm going to break down the offense, the defense, and overall grade that I would give these teams since I've seen them either in person or on film. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. I hope y'all enjoy it. Extreme Talk starts now. Welcome in everyone to Extreme Talk. My name is James Shannon. Thank you so much for checking out this episode and for checking out our YouTube channel, because obviously that's how you're listening to this. Make sure you check out our episodes of Extreme Radio that air live every Sunday at 4 p.m. And you can catch Spencer, Isaiah, and Wayne and myself on there at the very end for Skip the Sensitivity. You can catch the best 8-man football talk that there is out there for Tennessee and Kentucky. You can also check out our game broadcasts. If you're subscribed and have the little notification bell on, do you have the bell on? And if you have that bell on, then every time we go live, you'll be able to watch our game live. Of course, this week we'll be in Bowling Green again for South Haven Christian School and Bowling Green Christian Academy. Great MTAC North matchup happening this Friday night. Also on our YouTube channel, you can check out our game highlights. And that's something that our guy Isaiah Austin puts together. Does a fantastic job. You can see the top plays from across the conference and see what some of the best athletes have to offer from the past weekend's worth of games. Later on in the show, I'm going to have a great interview for you with Peter Coleman. He's from the NAAPS, the National Athletic Association of Private Schools. And it's a great conversation. They're a great organization that are helping give more coverage and publicity to the game of 8-man football. So, going to have a great talk with him. Right now, though, what I want to do is obviously every team has played a game at this point, other than Tennessee School for the Deaf. Every MTAC team has played a game at this point. And so what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to grade every team. I've been able to watch every team play, whether it be in person or through film. And I want to grade each team based off of several factors. How many points they scored, how many points they allowed, how do they look in those games, in the points they allowed and in the points scored. Did their points scored come kind of spread out throughout the game? Were they all bunched up at the beginning? Were they all bunched up at the end? So I'm going to rate grade their offense, their defense, and then I'm going to give them an overall grade of how I feel about the team now. Of course, this is week 4 or week 5 coming up. And like I said, every team, Swanee just played their first game this last week, so they have now gotten into their season. And so I want to grade each of these teams. I'm going to start in the South, and I'm going to start with the team that sits at number 1 right now, and that's Lancaster Christian Academy. First year of playing 8-man football. I've been very, very impressed with Coach Bragg and his staff and the job that they've done with their guys. But for their offense, I'm going to start out with a little bit of a shocker, and I'm actually going to grade them at a B+. And I'll explain why. Every time I give a grade, I'm going to explain why. So if you look at their games, they obviously played the Tennessee Heat, put up 26 points on them, played Franklin Christian, put up 56 points on them. Obviously, they should have put up 56 points on Franklin Christian, and that helped. But when you look at their game against the Tennessee Heat, and of course it was their first 8-man game, but Christian Community just put up 51 points on the Tennessee Heat. Bowling Green Christian put up 36 on the Heat in their loss. So when I see just 26 points and then I see what they, I see what they did to Franklin Christian, I can't give them any higher of a grade. So I'm going to go B+ for their offense. In terms of defense, I really want to give them an A. I really do, because You held the Tennessee Heat, which is a good ball team. They put up 46 on Bowling Green. They put up 20 on Christian Community. They held them to 14 points, and they were spread out. I believe there was a touchdown in the first half and a touchdown in the second half, and that was it. It wasn't bunched. So and they also only allowed 2 touchdowns against Franklin Christian, which is acceptable. That's understandable. They're still going to score. We're not going to have many shutouts. I know we had one a couple weeks ago, but we're not going to have many shutouts. So I'm going to give their defense an A. And the overall grade is going to be a combination of offense, defense, kind of like an average. And I'm also going to factor in special teams and other factors throughout the game, how I think their team effort was throughout the game. So for Lancaster, I'm actually going to give them an A-. And you'll notice it's between an A and a B+. I think that's a good spot for them to be at, is an A-. Special teams, they're solid. I can't give them an A because they were allowed a kick return for a touchdown against the Heat, which again I believe are a good ball team, but you cannot allow a kick return and get a high grade. So I'm going to give them an A-. So a B+ for offense, A for defense, and an A- overall. I want to talk about the Webb School next. And obviously we know a couple weeks ago they shut out South Haven Christian 41-0. This past Thursday night, they were playing Franklin Classical, and the game got called in the third quarter due to lightning. But they were leading them 33-6. So for offense, I want to give the Webb School an A because I think 33 points against Franklin Classical, and obviously coming out and it's your first game, it's South Haven's first game, so there's no excuses across the board. You put up, they had a couple interception returns, so knock a couple touchdowns off the offense. I mean, you're still putting up, let's say 16 points, so you're still putting up 25 points, which is a respectable. If you're in this league, 25 points. Sometimes it can get you a win. I mean, if you're Lancaster, they could get you a win, but I want to give them an A. Because I like their effort, and I think they had a great offensive game this past Thursday against Franklin Classical School. For the defense, I'm also going to give them an A. I do like what they've got and what they bring to the table. Obviously, it helps shutting out the defending state champions who should not have played like they did in that first week. There's no excuses no matter what. And so they put up 41 points. The defense shut them out when they played Franklin Classical School this last week. They allowed 1 touchdown in the first half. So, they did what they were supposed to do. They've been solid. I'm going to give them an A. And then overall, I'm also going to give them an A. I like what they've got in special teams. Their kicker, Spoonie Sizemore. I think they have several weapons that can return kickoffs and punts and do it really well. So I'm going to give them an A overall. All right, I'm going to move to number 3, and that's Riverside Christian Academy in terms of standings. So their offense, I've actually got them at a B-, and I'll tell you why. They would be lower. They would have been lower after that first game against Christian Community, just 6 points on the board. They rebounded. They put up 32 points against Franklin Classical. They put up 32 points against St. Andrew Swanee. So their 32 points is a respectable amount to put on the board. Most of the time, if it'll get you a win if you're playing maybe a bottom 3 opponent. It'll get you that victory. It'll get you that dub and help you in your divisional standing. The reason they are going to be at a B- is when you're playing Franklin Classical School, who's winless at this point. They're 0-3. And Webb put up 33 points in the first half. And Bowling Green put up 46 on them. If you're Riverside, 32 points is just enough to keep ahead of them. Just enough to just edge them out. It's only a 10-point win. They only had a 12-point win against Swanee in their first game. And I think their freshman quarterback, their young freshman and sophomore players, they're going to make mistakes at different points in games. So I am going to give them a B-. In terms of defense, though, I will give them a B+. And I'll tell you why. I like, obviously, the Christian Community game was not ideal, but you hold Franklin Classical to 22 points with the type of weapons they have. If you're for Riverside, they hold St. Andrew Swanee to 18 points. So they're holding them below that. That defense is saying, okay, if the offense is going to get me 32 points, I'm going to hold them right under that mark, and we're just going to shut down at about the 2 touchdown mark. And you're not going to get closer than 2 touchdowns to us throughout the fourth quarter. And obviously, they struggled against Christian Community, but that's to be expected. And overall, for Riverside Christian, I like what they have on special teams. They're of course, their defense, they've had 3 or 4 interceptions in 3 games, and they've just completely – their defense has played really well. Their special teams have played really well. So overall, I'm going to give Riverside an A+. I know, or an A-, rather, A-. So they're going to have a B- on offense, a B+ on defense, and then an A- overall because I like their special teams. The next team I want to talk about is the St. Andrew Sewanee Mountain Lions. So for their offense, I've got them at a C+, and I like what their freshmen have done. I like what their guys did on Thursday night against Riverside Christian. Obviously, guys like Jalen Tillman could have had a better game, and that plays into my defensive ranking. I've got Sewanee at a D. Christian Community handled Riverside that first week. Franklin Classical, who's 0-3, put up 22 points on them. Sewanee didn't put up 22 points on them. They put up 18. They missed some 2-point conversions. So I've got their defense at a B. I've got their offense at a C+. So overall, I'm going to give them a C. And I think Sewanee's going to have another player come out and potentially play it Friday night or tomorrow night. And I think that'll definitely help to their special teams. It'll help their overall because he was a guy from last year. He knows the system. Next thing we're going to talk about is Franklin Classical School. And a lot of people are going to say that I am going to be overly harsh on them. That's fine. But for Franklin Classical School, I'm actually giving them a D across the board. A triple D. 3D. Because if you on offense, you put up 14 points against Bowling Green Christian. You put up 22 points against Riverside Christian, which is respectable. And then you put up 6 points and a half against Webb. I understand Webb is good, but 6 points, can't do it. Can't do it. Special teams, I haven't really been impressed a whole lot, so they're going to get a D. Last team I want to talk about for the MTAC South, Franklin Christian Academy. I'm actually going to put them at a C, and I'll tell you why. They would be lower given the 12 points against Lancaster and the 20 points against Lighthouse. Kind of ridiculous. But they kicked off the year with a 50-point game against a team who has only allowed 14 against Classical, and they did allow 46 against the Heat, which are a really good ball team. So I've got FCA's offense at a C. Their defense obviously is at a D. 78 points to Bowling Green. You gave up 56 points to Lancaster. You gave up 38 to Lighthouse. So I've got their defense at a D. And to be honest, I haven't been super impressed with their special teams. So I'm going to give them a C+. I think they have good coaching. They have the ability to go higher. They've got John Buchanan. They've got Sonny Reed. They've got some weapons that they have to develop. So I give them a C+. So obviously, in terms of how I think my overall grades have gone, I've got Webb at number 1, Lancaster and Riverside tied at number 2. I've got FCA at a C+. I've got Sewanee at a C, and then I've got Franklin Classical at a D. And that's all overall. Now I want to take a look at the MTAC North, the division that I think is the stronger of the two between the North and the South. I'm questioning it a little bit, but I'm still pretty solid in my feeling on that. So for Christian Community School, I'm actually going to give them an A-. I like what they've done both to the Tennessee Heat as well as Riverside Christian. I think they did what they should have done. The offense took care of business. I think against both you saw a massive struggle from their offensive line. And Rowley has taken several sacks this year so far, just in 2 games. He might have taken some sacks in the forfeited game that they had with Sacred Heart. I don't know. That's how bad it might be. But I'm going to give them an A-. Their defense gets an A for sure. Hold Riverside to 6 points. You know, you're solid. Hold the Tennessee Heat to 20 points. It's pretty solid. Can't argue with it. So overall, I'm going to give Christian Community an A. Next team on the board is Sacred Heart of Jesus High School. And I'm actually going to give them a B+. And I'll tell you why. The reason they're a B is because their offense has not consistently produced throughout the game. They rev it up at the very end. And that's cool. It really is cool. They can score throughout the game, don't get me wrong. But near the end is where they turn on that little extra. They almost went to overtime the other night. Jalen Brown, little extra. Touchdown. Ball game over after South Haven tries to score. So I've got them at a B+. Their defense, I've got them at a C. Because, again, it's almost like a Riverside thing. You know, they only won 42-32. So you're giving up 32 points to Lighthouse. And then you're giving up 36 points to South Haven, who just got shut out by one of the better teams in the South, is what it's looking like. So, you know, I got to give Sacred Heart a C. Overall, I'm going to give them a B-. I don't think overall it's all there yet, but I don't think that they're CD material. I think it's a solid B-. Bowling Green Christian Academy. For their offense, I'm going to give them a B-. And before you lose your mind, here's why. They put up, what was it? 46 points against Franklin Classical. 36 points against the Tennessee Heat. And 78 points against Franklin Christian. So I'm going to give them a B- because I think they could have put up more points on Classical. And I think they should have put up more points on the Tennessee Heat. I don't know if they could have or not. But that's my thinking. So B- on offense. I'm going to give them a C on defense. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. Fourth quarter, they collapsed. Gave Christian Community the lead. Or the win, rather. Tennessee Heat's defense played Lancaster Christian and gave up 26 points to a team that had never played 8-man football before. So, go figure on that one. And overall, I'm going to give Bowling Green a C. Good solid C. That's where I think they are. Going down through here, I'm going to get to the Tennessee Heat. On offense, I'm going to give them a B+. You topped Bowling Green, who had already put up 78 and 46 points, so you already outscored them in that game. Well, they put up 46 against Classical, so it could have been a little different situation, but you know, they put up 14 points against Lancaster Christian, and then they put up 20 points against Christian Community. So I'm not super impressed. I'm going to go with a B- on here. In terms of their defense, and I think we talked about it a second ago, Christian Community, 51 points put up on them. Bowling Green Christian, 36. Lancaster Christian put 26 up on them to pick up the win. So I don't know what's going on with their defense, but their defense is going to get a C- for me. Have not been impressed with that defense. This past Saturday, yeah, Chris Savely had some plays. Other than that, wasn't super impressive. But in terms of special teams, when you factor that in, I am going to give them a B-. I know you had a B+ on your, or a B- on your offense. I'm going to go with B-. That's just where I think they are. Lighthouse Christian, I'm going to put their offense at a C because you couldn't beat another team like you. It was a 10-point game. So that's that. Lighthouse Christian, their defense, I've got them at a C+. I think that letting Sacred Heart putting up 42 on you and then letting Franklin Christian, who's unbeaten or winless, put up 20 on you, I don't like it. I don't like it. Lighthouse Christian overall, I'm going to give them a C. There's stuff they could improve on. So, and then the last one, of course, South Haven Christian. Their offense, I'm going to give them a C+. They had a great game this last Friday night. It helped them a lot, but they were still shut out last week. So just keep that in mind. Defensively for South Haven, yeah, I'm going with a D. D for defense. That's how it is. It's just it's crazy. You only put up 36 points on Sacred Heart. Just nothing. So South Haven, I got them at a C+. Defensively, yeah, it's a D. It's a D. It's just, again, with Webb, take away a couple defensive touchdowns, they still give up 3-4 touchdowns. And then against Sacred Heart, you give up 44 points throughout the game. So I don't like the way that defense is playing. I'm going to give them a D. And then finally, overall for South Haven Christian, I'm going to give them a C. I know I gave them a C+ and a D. I'm going to give them a C. I saw some good things this last Friday night. If they can continue to work on those and develop those instead of trying to be another team, if they're trying to be another team, that's when everything will come together. So that's my grades for all 12 MTAC teams since all of them have played so far. Hope you enjoyed it.
Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to have my interviewee this week. I'm getting to talk to Peter Coleman. He's from the NAAPS. And correct me if I make sure I get this acronym right. It's the National Athletic Association of Private Schools.
Right.
Okay. I didn't even know about you guys, to be honest, until about 2 weeks ago. And we had nominated Brooks Pugh from Christian Community. And he didn't win the votes for Player of the Week. Well, all of a sudden, Christian Community comes out and says, "Congratulations to Brooks Pugh, NAAPS Division 5 Player of the Week." And so I jumped all over it because I said, "Hey, there's another organization that actually cares about covering 8-man football." So I'm really excited to have Peter on. So, Mr. Coleman, first off, talk about your organization because I'm sure not a lot of people are familiar with y'all. So talk about your organization and how you got started with them.
So a lot of people will be familiar with us, and some will be familiar with what we were. Back in March, now we've been around about 10 years. Back in March, we merged with and bought out 3 different athletic associations. And so by doing such, we knew we had a chance to really, you're not guaranteed that those members are going to come. Fortunately, they did, but we knew the amount of resources we were going to bring in were going to allow us to take private school athletics to another level. And so I took over in May. I was voted as the executive director. I had been with the association for 3 years. But in May, I took over as executive director. And so since then, we've really put a lot of emphasis on a lot of new things we're doing, got a lot of great plans in the future. But talking about 8-man football is something that's very dear to my heart because I was a 8-man football player in high school. I was fortunate enough that I got a Division I scholarship and went to Jacksonville State University. But I'm an 8-man product, and I know of the amount of talent, the kind of games that you have on that level. The problem is the exposure isn't there. So one of the first things we wanted to do was really beef up our 8-man football exposure and really try to get the word out there about some of these great programs.
Man, you're already taking the questions out of my mouth. I was actually about to ask you to give us a bit of background on yourself. What area did you play 8-man football in?
Gadsden, Alabama at Coosa Christian High School, which is they went to 11 men now. They joined the public school league. Back at that time, there were a lot more 8-man teams in that area than there is now. Of course, there's still a lot of 8-man teams there, especially a lot in the around Montgomery and things of that nature have came up since then. But at that time, us and Jacksonville Christian and a lot of the schools were 8-man. Now, New Life Christian and some of those schools that were in our conference still remain, but a lot of the schools like Restoration Academy, Jacksonville Christian, a lot of those schools have went to 11-man. So it isn't as prominent in that area, but still a lot of good 8-man teams in the state.
I actually think I remember hearing about Restoration Academy playing 8-man because of the early like Christian Community, Franklin Classical School, some of the early 8-man teams in Tennessee playing them, and then there being a conference where you had teams from Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky all together. So I think I do remember hearing about Restoration now that I think about it.
Really, really good in their heyday. We beat them my senior year, which was the 97 football season. I graduated in 98, but we beat them my senior year. And prior to that, they had won 50-something games in a row. They were really, really good. We also had in that league New Life Christian, which is still an 8-man. At that time, they had Bobby Carr as their head coach, who went on to Edgewood Academy and, I think won like 60-some straight games. And then he left there and went to Otago Academy. He's won, 7 or 8 state more than that. He's all with that in baseball. He's got about 17 or 18 state championships. So at that time, it was a great conference. Restoration was really good. They were originally called Frontier Christian. Then they changed to Restoration after that.
I actually do remember. I also am familiar with New Life because the web school from Bell Buckle, who's on your rankings this past week, they actually played New Life last year. A little interstate games, and a couple teams here in the state have played Alabama teams, and of course we have a Kentucky team in our conference. So I personally like seeing states play each other, and that really plays into my next question. In terms of postseason national tournaments, of course, you used to have the NACA, National Association of Christian Athletes, out of Dayton, Tennessee, Fort Bluff Camp, and they used to have a national tournament every year. Well, they kind of I don't want to say died up, but they died out. And then now you have the NHSA tournament from Panama City, Florida, and Hank St. Dennis does a great job of organizing that. But in terms of national tournaments, what are your thoughts on them, and how do they really reflect the status of who is a powerhouse of it? Because there's so many 8-man teams, and you guys are helping to bring awareness to that. So how does that what are your thoughts on how does that help establish who might be the powerhouse, or who might be the true, at least in private schools, the true 8-man national champion?
And so what we're trying to do now, of course, we come out with weekly polls, and of course that tells you a little bit, but it doesn't tell you the whole story because not all these teams play. Of course, you got Holy Ground Baptist, who's number 1 right now. They're in Georgia. Christian Communities number 2. They're in Tennessee. Russell Christian's in Mississippi. Well, then you got Faith Baptist, who's in California. You got Rocky Mountains, who's in North Carolina. Wardlaw, South Carolina. Newman Catholic, who's in Wisconsin. And so on down the line. I think the answer, and we're really trying to figure it out, because tournaments are tough, because it's football's tough to put multiple games in a row right there together and play those games and just amount of, that's a tough thing. We are going to have bowl games. We know that. This year we're going to launch our first bowl game. So we're excited about that, and it's not the end of the story, but I think it's the start of the story. I think that the thing probably that's going to be, and again, we're open to ideas. We're looking at a lot of things, is we want to have multiple bowl games that are in between spots, that we can kind of put some of these teams together and see a little talent outside of that. Then if you got 3 or 4 games and you got the top representative out of Tennessee and the top representative out of South Carolina, the top representative out of, say, Nebraska, then you'd be able to see the picture a little bit clearer. We ultimately do want to go to 2 divisions for 8-man, but right now we're sticking with 1.
And I think another tough thing about that is, and this overlaps sometimes in other conferences, maybe from Georgia, because I know Georgia's 8-man situation, they have a longer postseason because I think they have a few more teams. But I think it'd be hard to get all 8-man teams together at one time from every state. just because of the different postseasons. And then you have schools that only allow maybe 1 week after the season for postseason play. And then it's like, okay, we're so small. Half our basketball team's on your football team, so we kind of have to wrap up football in order to get to basketball. And that's something we're always talking about here. We've got 12 teams in the MTAC, and I've been a proponent of a 16 playoff for a long time. For the last 11 years, it's been a 4-year 14 playoff, and then the 3 seeds play a bowl game against each other. And I've always been in favor of 16, but then in that case, you would have to extend the season a week, and that goes into basketball season. So it's a crazy situation. Of course, I've talked about it on a previous episode of Extreme Talk. But my next question for you is, how much are you able to find out from teams across the country that play into your Division 5 rankings? I know you guys have 6 different divisions worth of rankings. And like you said, 26 teams, so you have a lot to sort through. But how much are you actually able to find out from teams that plays into your rankings? Or because I know I don't want to say that you guys just look at wins and losses. You have to look at strength of opponent and different factors like that. So how much are you able to find out?
From an analytical and statistical standpoint, we find out a lot, and we really push teams that if they're not on max preps, that they make sure that they're reporting all their scores and things to us. That helps a lot as the season goes forward. Early in the season, it's tough. I mean, you hate to say that last season plays into it, but I mean, you look at this year. I know as a voter for me, I voted 1, 2, 3. I voted Holy Ground Baptist Christian Community and Russell Christian. And when I got to Christian Community and Russell Christian, I watched, thankfully for your video feed, that helps us a lot whenever we can watch games. I sent that over to other selection committee members, and they watched the game as well. And I think that was a big reason Christian Community jumped so high in the rankings this week. But you look last year, and I mean, Christian Community put a whooping on Russell Christian down at the last game of the season they played in. So you hate to say that plays into it early in the season. It probably does. But as the season goes forward, you get a bigger sample size. That's why I think bowl games are important, because as you begin to mix those in, it's just one game, and the cost of those tournaments. I played in the NACA tournaments as a coach for basketball. The price of those tournaments is expensive. Our bowl games doesn't cost them anything. So they play in a bowl game, and then you begin, I think, to be able to match. And we're not going to figure it out overnight, because college football still hadn't figured it out completely. So, but I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. But the thing that does help is, like I said, when teams have live feeds, when you can watch the game and you can see the team, and when it comes to the end of the season, we get down to those last 7 or 8 players. We're going to watch film on all those teams. We're going to watch those games. It isn't as thorough during the course of the season because we're putting out a weekly national ranking. It would be impossible to do. But by the end of the season, our final national ranking, we do watch at least the top 6, 7, 8 teams. We do watch game film from all of them.
I know for your bowl games, you're going to want, obviously, the best teams, the teams that have maybe either won their state championship, or in the case of NHSA last year, they wanted South Haven Christian to come down and play in the tournament, being the MTAC state champions, having beaten Christian Community, who was undefeated up until the championship. They wanted them to come, and they declined. So Christian Community headed down there. And then there was a question that kind of circulated as to, if you're not state champions, how can you be national champions? Because obviously Christian Community went down to Florida, and like you said, they put a whooping on Russell Christian. And I believe it was Hope Christian that they also beat. It was either Hope or maybe the Bakersfield Vols or whoever, the Life Academy out of California. So for you and maybe the guys on the selection committee, I don't know if you can speak for them, but if you guys are picking teams for your bowl games, or if you're picking a national tournament and you get a state championship team who declines, and you have a second place team who maybe went undefeated the whole season, and that team ends up winning your tournament, what are your thoughts on that kind of a situation where, people would say, well, how can you be the state champion if you can't be the national? How can you be the national champion without being the state champion? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, it makes great sense. I mean, we don't have to look any further going back to college football. Alabama didn't win the conference, but they're national champions. At the end of the day, from a college level, I don't like it because I'm a Georgia fan, but from a perspective.
See, right there, that hurts. I mean, I know we got whooped this past week, but come on, I bleed orange.
Okay. Well, listen, I think you got. We'll talk another time about that. But I think you got the right man for the job. Jeremy Pruitt's a heck of a football coach. He's got to turn the mentality around, which I think he's going to do. But the reality is, I mean, do we consider Alabama national champions? Alabama didn't win their conference. Christian Community didn't win their conference last year, but they went down and they played well enough to get the invite and to go down there and they won it. So in my mind, they're national champions. I don't think you could take that away from them. I do understand the argument there. At the same time, if they were there ready to take on the mantle for the conference, and they did it in a spectacular way.
Now, what kind of locations, you mentioned having a bowl game this year and possibly even wanting to have more. What kind of locations are you looking for your bowl games? Do you want to have it maybe at an 8-man school? And I know you have other bowl games for other divisions, but do you want to have a bowl game at an 8-man school, or are you looking for maybe a college or a big venue like that?
Right now we're working with big venues. We're definitely up for the idea of working with schools. We've thought about it in the early stages and development of it because it is quite a task because we have other divisions and other bowl games. It's quite the task to do that. One thing that we're doing right now is we're working with Christian colleges, whether it be the National Christian Collegiate Athletic Association, the NAIA, which has a lot of Christian schools in it, because it takes a different type of athlete to go to those schools. It doesn't just take athletic ability; it takes a level of character and a certain way to make it at those schools. So we're working with a lot of those schools for this year and for the future. But geographically, we got to look at where the good 8-man teams are. Obviously, when you talk about the Southeast and you talk about, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, that is where a huge strength of those schools are. There are also some good schools out in the Midwest that you don't want to miss. So we definitely are looking to put one. We think that the Missouri area is going to be a good game because you can pull some from a Kentucky. Tennessee's still not too far away, but at the same time, you could pull from Missouri, you can pull from Kansas, some of these places that have really good 8-man teams. The question comes in, how do we get California in the picture? California has great 8-man football out there, but like everything else, they're kind of out on their own island. So the big thing for us is geographically, it lines up perfect outside of California. So we're trying to figure out the California equation. I think everybody's been trying to do it for forever. But that's the biggest thing for us right now is because there are so many good teams. Another thing we're doing is we're adding, we have the All-American game. We're adding an 8-man All-American game. In the past, we've always had the 8-man players play in it, but they played in the 11-man division. And we thought, well, that seemed like the best thing to do. And maybe it was at the time, but I think it takes away from 8-man football and to put a guy outside of, even though there's so many similarities, there are some differences, and it takes him outside of his comfort zone and he's playing catch up. So we want to not just show off the players. We want to show how beautiful the 8-man football game is and how valuable it is. And I think that it's going to become even more valuable in the future. And so with that said, I think having your own game, it allows us to see some of those athletes from different places so that when we see them the following year, because we don't just do a seniors only All-American game. So when you see those players the next year, you got a better idea of what you're looking at on film.
It's so tough too, because I'm on both sides of the point of view of your All-American game. And like you said, you had an 11-man game that 8-man players participated in. And I love the 8-man game. I'm passionate about it. I want to show it off to people and show that it's equal to 11, but at the same time, and show off how 8-man football is played so that people can kind of understand it more. But on the other side, I'm a big proponent of putting 8-man players in 11-man situations, because I feel that if they get the opportunity to go to college, they're not going to get it catered to what they're used to. They're going to have to adapt. And so it's tough because I'm on both sides, and it plays into my next question. What are your thoughts on the 8-man and 11-man situation? 8-man versus 11-man, the equality of the two. A lot of people obviously look down, and it's not just Tennessee; it's other states that they look down on it and look at it as lesser football. And I know you're coming from the perspective of you played 8-man, I played 8-man. I'm passionate again that it's equal. We had just had a kid go to Southeast Missouri University. We've got kids at Carson Newman, Kentucky Christian. We had a kid that had 4 or 5 scholarship offers from D3 and NAIA schools. So we've got kids going to college and playing football from the 8-man level. I'm very passionate that it's equal, but at the same time, I do recognize the uniqueness of the game. So what are your thoughts on that, on the 8 versus 11 and the equality of the two styles of the game?
If I'm an expert on the subject, but playing 8-man football in high school, going to Jacksonville State University and playing, I can tell you that, and I was in high school, I was a running back and middle linebacker. I got to college and I was a wide receiver and was fortunate to become an all-conference wide receiver. But I can tell you that the skill set, the things I did in 8-man were the same skill sets that I used in 11-man. The difference to me, there are differences scheming-wise and philosophical-wise, but it's still the same concept. It's still one in the trenches. It's still blocking. It's still tackling. It's still all the same principles. A tackle is a tackle regardless of how many men are on the field. Now, again, it is a much higher scoring game. There's, you can't deny that. But to think the talent level, I can tell you this: when I played in Alabama, there's no doubt in my mind the conference we had. We had several Division I talents. Now, sometimes exposure is a problem, and that exposure is not there. Sometimes it's the unknown, even for a college coach that's not familiar with 8-man. Sometimes that's a challenge even for a college coach to figure out, well, how good is this guy really? I know his stats are, off the charts, but how good is he really? At the end of the day, football is football. And, I think that the games are equal. I do think they're different. I do think there are some things that are different about the games. We're not denying that. I think 8-man football is a lot more fun to watch. Would I rather see a 50-40 game or a 7-10 game? Maybe you like a 10-7, maybe you make it like a 40-50, but it doesn't make one better than the other. I think they're both great products. But when it comes to transferring of the game, there is no reason. It is the same principles. It is still blocking. It is still tackling. It is still passing. It is still catching. It is still your vision. All those things are the same. I had no struggles transferring from the 8-man to the 11-man game.
Well, and the crazy thing is that, I keep up with the public school and the 11-man private school scores around here every Friday night. I follow them on Twitter. And I'm looking through these scores, and I'm like, okay, here's for instance, here's a 32-22 8-man game, and here's a 64-14 or 64-21 11-man game. And I just look at it, I'm like, people, obviously there are some games that are higher scoring. The Christian Community Tennessee Heat game was higher scoring. The South Haven Sacred Heart game from this past Friday night was high scoring. It was on up there in points. At the same time, I look at both and I'm like, you can't stick a label on one type of football because every game is different. I know the championship game last year was high scoring, and you can go watch that on our YouTube channel. The MTAC championship game between South Haven Christian Community, and it was high scoring, but at the same time, it was a knockdown, drag out slugfest, back and forth. It's the kind of football that I think a lot of people like to watch. But at the same time, you have games that it's a low ball game. You can have a 20-18 ball game and not even think anything of it, just because the teams are so close. So I think that's the crazy part about it is, people try to stick labels on 8-man and put it in this box, and it's like, look, again, like you said, football is football, and just different situations are going to come up. And in terms of college coaches that you've talked to, what is the kind of reaction to picking up 8-man players? Because I think, sometimes college coaches look at 8-man players and say, well, this guy had great stats. Like you said, this guy had great stats, but who were his opponents? But then they tend to, I personally think they tend to look at 11-man players, see great stats, and not think the same thing and be like, okay, well, this guy's just going to take off in college. And then the complete opposite can happen. The 8-man player can be super successful and the 11-man wash out. So in terms of, I don't know how many college coaches you've talked to, but what's kind of their take on recruiting 8-man players?
lot of it here lately. One thing we do for our member schools is we have a recruiting thing in place, and we've got, I mean, with all the sports, we've got over 700 coaches that we send stuff out through during the course of the season. But one thing that I have found is that a lot of the things that I battled against as a player coming up in 8-man, the new players coming forth in the next few years aren't going to have to face it as much, because what is happening is with the different spread offenses, the different gimmick offense, I don't want to say gimmick, but the different styles of offense that are out there now, bloated on both sides. If you call it bloated, you know, they're high on both sides because it's still the same thing. It's trying to get one-on-one separation plays. And so we're seeing less of that. What they're wanting to see with 8-man players is, if I'm sending them a receiver, they want to see catches, but they want to see them blocking. They want to see them doing the other aspects of the game. So when we put together highlight videos, what we're doing now is we're not just sending big plays, because, you know, coaches still will have, and it's going to 11-man game too now. Stats aren't as important. They want to see the small thing, not small, but we call them small, but the fundamental things, how they're doing. The linemen, you know, they want to see, you know, how they block, how they fall through, all of the things that you would see in a regular game. We just have found that when we put together highlight films, they don't want to see how many times the guy caught a slant and took it 70 yards. They want to see how the guy blocked on the edges, all the other small things that he'll have to do when he gets to the next level.
Right. That's such a huge key of that, is getting the coach to help with that. And I think sometimes some schools either have a coach that either, I don't know that he doesn't want to, or he doesn't have the time or the ability to. So that's a lot of the holdup. But I think once kids can get that under control and get that figured out, like you said, a lot of it is sending film to coaches, and because they want to actually see you play, they don't want to just see stats that someone could have inflated, you know, on a piece of paper.
Well,
but now, sorry, go ahead.
I go back to what you said. These head coaches now, we you know, they're at private schools and they're playing 8-man, so they're probably, you know, they're not the larger private schools, and so they're not getting paid the best money in the world if they're getting paid at all to coach. You know, we already got them doing, you know, driving buses and feeding fields and watching kids and changing diapers and everything else. It's hard for them to take hours and put together game film. It's more difficult in the fact that, you know, they're not used to it, so they don't know what the coaches are looking for. So that's where you come in. Us guys going out there and getting these guys the exposure they deserve, because with the change of the way the game has changed on the collegiate level, it's up, I think, for 8-man players to get the exposure they didn't once get. And I'm like I said, I'm excited of 8-man football.
I think that services like crossover, because all the coach has to do is get a game or put it on there. You can break it down. Players can get on highlight reel, and as long as they know what coaches are looking for, that they can take the stress off of in terms of doing that. So I really, really like those services. I think that I think that if you're a league, I think you look into using. And some people complain about taking the individuality away, but I think you have to think about picture and not just the schools, but helping kids. So now your All-American game this year. What are the dates for that? And do you have the 8-man? Is it just the 11-man?
In January, like most of the All-American games that are played during that time. I believe it falls on the 5th this year. To check and see. I may be telling you wrong. Let me just look real quick. Yeah, the 5th. So January 5th. So the 3rd, 4th, and 5th falls in a good spot. It's going to be at the Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama. We're going to have the games on the same day. So 8-man game will start at 11 o'clock, and then the 11-man game will start at 2:30. But it's going to be at Legion Field, where the University of Alabama Birmingham plays at now, where obviously Alabama and Auburn used to have the Iron Bowl at. But it'll be a pretty good venue. We're really excited to announce, hopefully here in the next few weeks, where our future home will be for the next 5 years for this game. But for this year, it'll be at Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama.
That's really awesome. And it's even better because I struggle with the NHSA with this situation where their tournament is the same week as my All-Star game. So we actually lost a couple players from Christian Community that were going to come to the All-Star game. But and I don't say my All-Star game. I said, 8-Man Extreme's All-Star game. But that's really awesome that the dates do not conflict, because there are definitely kids that I think that you should see at the 2018 Extreme All-Star game. And that maybe there's some kids that can head up to you guys, or head down to you guys rather, in Birmingham, and get a chance to play at a great place like Fort Bluff Camp and the NACA, and then go play on a bigger stage at a college field in a college environment. That's really, really awesome.
And so what we felt about that date was is that it also frees up. Most people don't have, if they're playing basketball, most people don't, because you're out for, the new year. Most schools are going to start back that following Monday. So it gives families a chance to travel down, for a 3-day trip. And we think it fits in kind of perfect and kind of go there. And we're looking excited to get down to your All-Star game this year as well, because we're going to be out there. One of the things that we do is, we have every division has an All-American team. Every division has All-Region. And so one of the things we're going to do is be out there and scouting some of these guys and making some award selections off of what we see, because we know there's going to be some great talent down there.
Well, that's awesome. And obviously you can go back and the last 2 games we've had have been fantastic. Last year's game came down to a touchdown with about a minute left. The guy took the ball 97 yards. So I think you guys are in for a real treat with some real talent. Looking forward to seeing you up at Dayton. Peter, thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to working with you guys and getting 8-Man football the exposure and the proper coverage that it deserves and that these kids deserve.
And we look forward to working with you as well, because, like I said, you've helped us already just by the way your coverage of it. We're able to go down and take some cliff notes from it and even watch games online. So we appreciate so much what you're doing for 8-Man football.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I had a great time talking to Peter and talking about the organization. Go give them a follow on Twitter. I know they're on Twitter. They're on Facebook. Just search NAAPS, or you can search National Athletic Association of Private Schools. Of course, they've got 6 divisions. Division 5 is their 8-man football division. I believe Christian Community sits at number 2 at this current recording, and I think the Webb School is in their top 25 as well. So big shout out to those guys. They're a great organization. I'm looking forward to working with them. Thank y'all so much for checking out this episode of Extreme Talk. I hope to see y'all at a game Friday night. We're going to be at Bowling Green Christian hosting South Haven Christian, but no matter where you are, if you see our guys, if you see one of us, stop, say hi, give us a shout out, and as always, it's 8-man football time in Tennessee. See ya! Thanks for listening.